My friend asked me a weird thing about you, and I stayed silent because some stories aren't meant for words. I was speechless because their question made me realize how much you've quietly changed my world. My friend asked me about you, and I paused, realizing no answer could capture what I feel inside. I couldn't speak because every thought of you overwhelms my mind, like waves crashing endlessly. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I smiled silently, knowing some truths are too delicate to share. I froze, because explaining you would feel like trying to catch a shadow in my hands. My friend's question made me realize how effortlessly you live in every corner of my heart. I was speechless because no words could ever explain the weight of what you mean to me. My friend asked me about you, and I had to breathe for a moment before letting silence answer. I couldn't respond because you exist in the quiet spaces between thoughts, impossible to put into sentences. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I realized some connections are too sacred to describe. I froze because trying to explain you would reduce a universe into a single phrase, impossible to do. My friend's question left me quiet because some feelings are meant to be experienced, not narrated. I was speechless because even imagining putting you into words felt like betraying a secret too precious. My friend asked me about you, and I realized that truth lies in glances, touches, and moments, not explanations. I couldn't answer because how do you sum up someone who feels like sunlight and storm at once? My friend asked a weird thing about you, and all I could do was let my heart speak silently. I froze because describing you in words would never capture your gravity, your essence, your pull. My friend asked about you, and I realized some truths about love are meant to be unspoken. I was speechless because every memory of you leaves me struggling for words that don't exist. My friend's question made me quiet because some people leave an imprint that language cannot touch. I couldn't respond because you are felt in the chest, not understood in sentences. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I realized explaining would lessen what makes you extraordinary. I froze because some things about you are alive in ways that can't be captured. My friend asked me about you, and I stayed silent, letting my eyes hold the answer instead. I was speechless because even imagining an answer made my heart ache with truth. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I realized no one else could ever see you like I do. I couldn't speak because some truths are written in moments, not uttered in words. My friend asked me about you, and I realized silence often says more than 1,000 explanations. I froze because the weight of what I feel for you is impossible to compress into language. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I smiled quietly, knowing some mysteries are better kept. I was speechless because their question touched something inside me that only you inhabit. My friend asked me about you, and I realized no one could truly understand your effect on me. I couldn't respond because trying to explain you felt like trying to capture a lightning storm in a jar. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I stayed quiet, letting my heartbeat answer for me. I froze because you exist in my thoughts in a way that refuses to be described. My friend asked me about you, and I realized some truths are only meant to echo silently between hearts. I was speechless because even the simplest question about you triggers an endless chain of emotions. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I smiled, realizing some parts of you are untouchable, even in words. I couldn't answer because some people don't fit into sentences. They live in glances, memories, and whispers. My friend asked me about you, and I realized no words could ever measure the way you linger inside me. I froze because explaining you would be like explaining the sky. Beautiful, infinite, and impossible to hold. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I stayed silent, letting the truth exist in the quiet. I was speechless because some people are too alive, too intense, too essential to be explained. My friend asked me about you, and I realized some answers exist only in shared smiles and stolen moments. I couldn't respond because your presence itself is a language. My heart understands, not my lips. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I froze, realizing some stories are meant to remain unspoken. I was speechless, because even imagining putting you into words would be like painting a sunset with charcoal. My friend asked me about you, and I smiled silently, knowing that some truths are safest kept in the heart. I couldn't speak because some people are felt, not explained, and you are one of them. My friend asked me a weird thing about you, and I was silent, because some people rewrite your heart without notice. I couldn't speak because even thinking about explaining you made my words crumble. My friend asked me about you, and I froze. I stayed silent because your effect on me is impossible to translate into sentences. My friend's question made me pause because some people are felt, not described. I was speechless because their question reminded me how deeply you've changed the way I feel. My friend asked something weird about you, and I smiled quietly, knowing some secrets are sacred. I couldn't answer because your presence alone is a story that doesn't need telling. My friend asked me about you, and I realized that some answers live in silence. I froze because even imagining explaining you made my chest tighten with the weight of feeling. My friend asked me a weird thing about you, and I stayed quiet, letting my heart do the talking. I was speechless because some people are impossible to capture. They exist in glances, in breaths, in echoes. My friend asked about you, and I realized some things are only understood by experiencing them. I couldn't respond because even my imagination falls short of holding you in words. My friend asked me a weird thing about you, and I froze, knowing no explanation could honor your presence. I stayed silent because the depth of my feelings for you can't be measured by speech. My friend asked me about you, and I smiled, realizing that some mysteries are meant to remain untold. I was speechless because even trying to describe you felt like compressing a universe into a single sentence. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I couldn't answer. Because love like this differs. Ordinary is, and I realized some truths exist only in the quiet spaces between hearts. I couldn't speak because even the smallest word would fall short of what I feel. My friend asked me a weird thing about you, and I stayed silent, letting the unspoken answer linger. I was speechless because some people leave a mark so profound that words are powerless. My friend asked me about you, and I froze, knowing some emotions are meant to remain private. I couldn't respond because you exist in the subtle ways the heart knows, not the mouth. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I smiled quietly because some truths are meant to live in secrecy. I was speechless because even the simplest question about you opens a storm of emotions. My friend asked me about you, and I froze, realizing that some answers are only found in feeling. I stayed silent because describing you would feel like trying to capture lightning in my hands. My friend asked a weird thing about you. Couldn't answer because your presence overwhelms any explanation. I was speechless because some people live in the spaces between words, and you are one of them. My friend asked me about you, and I realized that some truths cannot survive being spoken aloud. I froze because your essence is too big to fit into the small container of language. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I stayed quiet, letting the silence say everything. I couldn't respond because some people are felt, not narrated, and you are one of them. My friend asked me about you, and I smiled, realizing that the unspoken often speaks loudest. I was speechless because even imagining trying to explain you felt like opening a floodgate inside me. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I froze, knowing some parts of you exist only in my heart. I stayed silent because your presence writes stories my words could never contain. My friend asked me about you, and I couldn't answer because you are too infinite, too essential, too alive. I was speechless because some feelings are sacred, and explaining them would dilute their power. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I stayed quiet, letting my eyes carry the truth. I froze because describing you would be like describing the wind. It moves through everything, yet belongs to none. My friend asked me about you, and I smiled quietly, realizing that some mysteries are meant to be kept. I couldn't speak because some people inhabit your soul in ways that language cannot touch. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I stayed silent because some answers exist only in feeling. I was speechless because even thinking about you fills every corner of my heart too full for words. My friend asked me about you, and I froze, realizing that no explanation could ever do you justice. I stayed quiet because some truths are lived, not spoken, and you are one of those truths. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I smiled silently, knowing that silence often carries the deepest meaning. My friend asked me a weird thing about you, and I couldn't answer because my heart already knew the truth. I was speechless when my friend asked about you, not because it was strange, but because words failed to capture you. My friend asked me a weird thing about you, and I froze, realizing no question could explain what you mean to me. I couldn't speak when asked about you because how do you explain someone who changes your soul? My friend's question made me silent because no one could understand the gravity of what you do to me. I was caught off guard when my friend asked, and all I could do was look at you and smile. My friend asked me a weird thing about you, and I realized some feelings are too deep for simple words. I froze because their question was simple, but my answer would be endless. That's how much you affect me. My friend asked about you, and for a moment I wondered if they could feel the weight you carry in my heart. I couldn't respond because your presence leaves me speechless, even in thought, even in memory. My friend's question about you made me realize just how unexplainable you are, and I didn't even try. Words failed me when they asked, because no sentence could hold the way you make my world shift. My friend asked something odd about you, and I realized the truth about us is something only silence can say. I was speechless because the question wasn't weird. It was the answer that didn't exist outside my heart. My friend's curiosity left me quiet because every thought of you is too personal to share casually. I couldn't answer their question because even my soul struggles to explain the way you exist in me. My friend asked me a weird thing about you, and I realized you are a mystery even to my own mind. I had no words because how do you summarize someone who feels like an entire universe in one person? My friend's question was simple, but my answer would take lifetimes, and so I remained silent. I couldn't speak because even thinking about you makes my heart skip sentences and stammer emotions. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I paused because love like this doesn't translate into words. I was speechless, not because the question was strange, but because the truth about you is overwhelming. My friend asked me about you, and I realized some connections aren't meant to be explained. They are meant to be felt. I couldn't respond because their curiosity touched a part of me that only you inhabit. My friend's question left me quiet because how can I explain someone who feels like home and fire at once? I froze because your impact on my life is beyond the reach of ordinary conversation. My friend asked something about you, and for a moment, I unbeaten. They didn't yet know the chaos you bring. I couldn't speak because the truth about you is so intense, even thinking it is overwhelming. A weird thing about you, and I smiled silently, knowing some feelings are too sacred to voice. I was speechless because their question made me realize how much of you lives inside me already. My friend asked me, and I couldn't explain. Some people aren't meant to be explained, only experienced. I froze because their words tried to cage what can't be caged. The way you make me feel. My friend asked about you, and I realized how impossible it is to describe someone who rewrote my world. I was silent because the question wasn't strange. It was the answer that didn't exist yet. My friend asked me a weird thing about you, and I had no choice but to smile at the thought of us. I couldn't answer, because no combination of words could ever capture the way you linger in me. My friend's question about you made me realize the depth of unspoken understanding between us. I froze, because even imagining explaining you felt like betraying a secret too sacred to share. Friend asked something about you, and all I could do was let my eyes speak the answer. I was speechless, because how do you tell someone about a person who feels like a heartbeat in your soul? My friend's question made me quiet, because some truths about you are meant to remain private, untouchable. I couldn't respond, because words would crumble under the weight of the way you move inside me. My friend asked me about you, and I realized some things are too powerful for conversation. I froze, because describing you in words would be like trying to catch sunlight with my hands. My friend asked a weird thing about you, and I stayed silent, letting my heart answer instead. I couldn't speak because every time I tried to explain you, I failed gloriously. My friend asked me, and I realized some people don't fit into sentences. They exist in echoes, in glances, in feelings. I was speechless, because even thinking about explaining you felt like opening a floodgate in my chest. My friend asked something weird about you, and I realized I didn't want to explain. I just wanted to feel.